Let me begin with the land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat, who are the traditional owners and custodians upon the lands in which I am gathered here in Toronto, or as known by its Mohawk name, Tokaranto. I'm going to talk to you about the Supertoken, and I'll explain what that concept is. But it's important to understand, as many institutions redouble their commitments to hiring for diversity and inclusion, and in the context here, decolonization, what are some of the pitfalls that exist, and what is it the experience in and of itself to be, again, what I am calling a Supertoken. So let me begin kind of with a little bit of a story. So I could feel the tears welling in my eyes, which they always did when I get to this part of the keynote that I give, where I describe how diversity is getting the invitation and inclusion is getting invited to the dance, but those things in and of itself were not enough. And then I tell the audience a secret, that I once got bullied for a job after standing up for myself and the team when an executive director came in and did what we call a swoop and poop. So come in, look at the work, swoop in, poop on all the work that everyone has done. And I called out the lack of respect of that particular activity. And so I explained in the keynote, like, how the next day, my teammates wouldn't meet me eye to eye in the elevator. Within the week, there was all these meetings about me to which I had not been invited. And by the end of the week, I had been reassigned from all of my plum assignments. And again, always knowing to have an exit strategy in place, I actually soon left the company and found another position. But again, really trying to understand that these efforts around diversity and inclusion is not enough if people get punished for calling out disrespect, right? It is not enough if people are asked to, let's say, dance to a white European male's cis hetero middle class abled body and mind Christian status quo. And in fact, these invitations and being invited to dance in the absence of this kind of diversity and possibilities is actually a genocide to the spirits of the diverse peoples you want to hire. And afterwards, I had a conversation with David Brown for the advertising magazine, The Message. And I was explaining this experience to him. And he asked, was it just a part of being, a toxic work environment? And I had to explain to him, as someone who's, again, Black and cis female, that the lack of acceptance that you find, the lack of respect, compounds in many ways the toxicity of any work environment, because that toxicity is a reflection of how the whole society sees you. In other words, each difference that I have from the normative list of identities, the more likely than not that the world in and of itself is a toxic environment. And so the sad thing about this particular story is that it's not the first time that I've been bullied from a work environment. And much like the proclamations made by design firms and institutions after summer of 2020, where many, again, championed and recommitted themselves to diversity and inclusion, like my presence in an institution is also often used as a tangible proof of that commitment. And yet there are clear reasons in my experiences and the experience of others why these diversity inclusion efforts are actually failures. That when diversity is not allowed to reach a critical mass to influence the culture, the strategic direction, and the real power structure of an institution, then inclusion just requires me to culturally assimilate to dominant norms, often working against my own values. So during the month of June 2020, in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests against the murder of George Floyd, OCAG University, where I'm the Dean of Design, announced the results of our Black Cluster hire, where we addressed 144 years of zero representation of Black faculty full-time Black faculty in design. And because we had been ahead of the curve by a year, right? Because our hiring processes take an entire year to complete. we were able to inform and guide other Black hiring initiatives as they were being announced and planned, both in industry as well as in higher education, especially throughout North America. At the same time, the call for equity for the people of color in advertising and marketing in Canada sent an open letter to the advertising industry, especially here in Canada, to respond to the situation with hiring initiatives. Some of these were taxi agency here based in Toronto, hired Stephanie Small, this amazing dynamic Black woman, to lead the establishment of the Black Taxi, which embarked on rewriting the HR policies and job descriptions, actually directly influenced by OCAD's Black Cluster Hire. It shifted its outreach efforts, eliminated unpaid internships, and partnered with organizations to provide mentorship. And again, I'm personally aware of the success of this because 2 OCAD University Black advertising students were hired as part of that first cohort. In June 2020, POCAM established a tracker for 105 agency and clients who answered to the call to equity. And other organizations like Publicis hired Mia Nelson, Brent Nelson, and Stephanie McRae for its diversity inclusion efforts up to the tune of $45 million US. So there was a lot of things that were acting, but as I've watched over the last 6 or 7 months, one of the things that I've noticed is that there's some pitfalls that you're beginning to see in these diversity and inclusion efforts. And one of those pitfalls is the hiring of the Supertoken. Now, when people ask me what it takes to become the first Black dean of a faculty of design anywhere in the world, my answer is straightforward. I'm a Supertoken, which I define as an individual from a structurally excluded group or groups whose talents are so desired by institutions that those institutions are able to overcome their innate aversion to the individual's identities in order to have access to those talents. So, I think of former US President Barack Obama is a Supertoken. Most Indigenous, Latinx, Asian Pacific, Middle Eastern, or other non-European person, including many women who are first of anything, is likely to be a Supertoken. So the talent I bring is an everyday genius level of intelligence, which specifically is around pattern recognition and creative synthesis. And when I was in my late 20s, a mentor once gave me the book called The Gifted Adult, A Revolutionary Guide to Liberating Everyday Genius by Mary Ellen Jacobson. And the book's premise is that by being a gifted adult means that you have not just a high intelligence quotient, but you operate on completely different levels of sensitivity and intensity than other people. So because you process information more quickly, you might move from A to D while skipping points B and C, which means oftentimes you have to cultivate patience to walk people through the B and C steps that you're skipped, especially when you're working with a team. Your energy and intensity is high, which means you might have 3 times the productivity of your peers, which again, sometimes gets framed as making them look bad. So the book helped me learn that while people may want my talents, they may not necessarily want me. And part of the disruptiveness I bring to systems is also the fact that these talents come in the body of a young looking Black cisgendered female, which breeds resentment because our systems of white supremacy, our systems of sexism say that I shouldn't be that smart or that successful. And so I wonder how many in the hiring initiatives people are looking for the Supertoken, and understand that the Supertoken plays a really important role in terms of breaking down barriers. As Supertoken, as described by my friends, my Indigenous friends, are often path makers, that they go through and they identify new paths that an organization can follow, because the differences that they do bring to the organization leads to innovation, leads to greater embracing of diverse communities that they're seeking to reach by bringing those communities into the organization. So in many ways, they play a very important role in some ways being a catalyst for organizational transformation. But they also can be used to erect new barriers. So for example, like, how does one become the first Black dean of design is that you have to have had, in my case, a PhD from Stanford University. You had to have worked at least 7 years in high-tech consulting. You had to have led the US National Design Policy Initiative, served as an associate dean for learning and teaching, a role that was created for me at a university in Australia. And then, you know, again, create this list of accomplishments in my CV that are so rare that even sometimes I feel like I can't live up to them. So in that sense, it's dangerous to use the Supertoken, some like me, as the standard, because it means marginalizing other people who may have been blocked from the access or advancement because they're not like Dori. So seeking a Supertoken as part of like one's diversity and inclusion initiatives will bring surface diversity, but it won't necessarily be exclusion. Again, the Supertoken exists because they've already excelled in systems that were meant to crush them. Their presence in a firm or an institution does not automatically change the system. And in some cases, the Supertoken might be the one upholding the system with a, I made it through, so why can't you attitude? So if you're seeking a Supertoken to hire, make sure that it is one who is willing to use their privileges to dismantle the systems of exclusions for others. And then that way, your diversity and inclusion initiatives will be successful. So for me, the success of the ability to achieve really important transformations in terms of diversity and inclusion in many ways requires the death of the Supertoken. And the death of the Supertoken brings forward two important things that are the representation of the transformation of an organization. First of all, it's the changing of standards so that you take into account systemic exclusion. So one of the things that I and others have done at OCAD University, we've written our qualifications for our employees to take into account the fact that, let's say, some people may not have access to post-secondary education, but again, through work or through community engagement, have been able to develop the equivalent knowledge and skills that we still want to embrace, even if it doesn't come in the form of having a formalized degree. Again, that's a way of like saying that the system has been excluding these people. And so how do we create new structures that recognize that exclusion and embrace them in the institution? The other aspect, again, that moves you away from looking at the Supertoken, besides changing the qualification standards to take into account systemic exclusion, is again, building a sense of a critical mass. Most of the time, when an institution is looking for a Supertoken, it's because they're hiring the one. And so that one person has to have all of the qualifications, all the exceptionalism in order to justify that sense of scarcity, right? And meritocracy that we believe exists in our hiring systems. And so when you think about bringing in a cohort, you change that mentality in terms of like, I'm actually looking for a variety of people who have a variety of skills, a variety of life experiences, a variety of perspectives, so that I can truly embrace inclusion and diversity by just seeing the diversity of this group of people that I'm trying to bring in, instead of trying to find a one who is all encompassing of everything that we could possibly imagine needing in the organization. And so if you implement in many ways that mentality to understand that, again, what you're trying to do is change your systems to address systemic exclusion, to change your qualifications, that you're actually trying to find diversities within the group, and so you may need to hire as a group instead of an individual, then those are the ways in which you, again, bring about the death of the super token, which relieves pressure on the individual who might be the super token in the sense of carrying into the organization all of the hopes and dreams and aspirations of those structurally excluded groups. It also relieves the pressure in the sense that, again, it recognizes or embraces not just the talents that that individual brings to the institution, but the fullness of who they are as a person, and embraces that as well. And so, so I ask of you, call to action in some ways is to think about and approaching how can we think about diversity and inclusion in such a way that it brings about the death of the super token, that it brings about these processes of a strategic and structural inclusion that takes into account the exclusions that have happened in the past and continue, and allows people to bring their full, diverse, and nuanced identities into the institution so that institution can flourish through the connections those individuals brings to new audiences whom they want to embrace, or new perspectives that bring innovation. So thank you very much. And since I won't be able to attend the Q&A, I'm more than happy to take some direct questions now.
Thank you so much, Dori. I really appreciate that. I also wanted to just say thank you for all of the work that you volunteer to do, but that you're forced to do in your position in educating us. I think it's really easy to underestimate, you know, what we're expecting from people like you right now as we've gone through this kind of awakening, which we hope will only get bigger and louder as that aperture opens. So I want to say thank you for that. I also want to ask, could someone be a super token without realizing?
Yes, yes. And what for me has been really interesting as I give presentations that introduce this concept, people are like, oh, I'm a super token. Wait, thank you for articulating, like, again, the pressures that I've been feeling and the aloneness that I've been feeling in the institution, and that sense of like exceptionality that I'm supposed to bring in everything that I do, and the weightedness of that. So it has been really important, I think, to actually have the conversations with people who, again, because we haven't really introduced the concept, haven't really actually talked through what it means to be in that position within an organization. And again, some of the important transformative role that they can have once they recognize where they're at and what they're meant to be doing. But also, again, that reminder of a barrier, because there have been in situations where like, oh, we had 10 more of Doris, we would have so much, you know, diversity and flourishing. And it's like, but what is it? Cary Grant once said, like, I wish I was Cary Grant. So there's a moment where I feel like I wish I was Dori Tunstall, because that is in some ways a mythical being that's being created, right?
Yeah, I hear you. And for those of us who were able to see Chichi from the Chineke Orchestra, she's founded in Europe the first ethnically majority orchestra. She talks about exceptionalism too. And when she first brought that orchestra together, she'd never met half those people because they were all one of one somewhere, right?
Yeah. And
so that was just an interesting kind of place to start. And I was just going to let everyone know that we had a fantastic conversation, I think, last week about we'll know that things have leveled out when mediocre women are getting to the top as much as anyone else who's mediocre. So,
well, and again, you know, for me, this is where the work has to be done, because we're even in the cluster hires and things that we are doing, where again we're trying to change the sort of criteria. It's like, well, all we've done is we've broadened the notion of excellence and the domains in which they come from, but everyone still has to be excellent, right? And so I hope in the next 5 years that I'll be able to hire someone who's mediocre. That is my goal.
And just repeat for us then, before we let you go onto the chat bar and answer some questions, what you'd like, what's the one thing you'd like us to take away and think about today?
I think it's really about, think about structural exclusion and the ways in which you need to dismantle that. Because like the failure of hiring the Supertoken as part of your DEI efforts is that they are the ones who've not been structurally excluded. Like they're the ones who've gone through the gauntlet and survived. And so if you think about who is it that we're excluding and what is it that they would need in order for us to change, for them to have access to us, to feel that they belong with us, like that's where the true transformation happens.